Okay, it's pretty obvious after the third dump here that Julian Assange is going down, and WikiLeaks probably. Well, WikiLeaks may not be able to go down, but he's in trouble. Okay, and with the WikiLeaks organization is also in trouble, and really, actually, this has exploded in the face of people who support open internet, people like myself who think the internet is something that can be used to restrict the power of or check government. This has exploded in all of our faces, and Assange has done us a great disservice. He's dumped an enormous amount of gossipy information. The vast majority of it was stuff about what American diplomats thought of physical appearance, the sex life, the personal conduct of foreign leaders, and it has given these states finally enough public support against him that they can go after him. The two earlier dumps, WikiLeaks and Julian Assange, were able to get away with because they are built on an established tradition. It is established in the West that when a government goes to war, if it is giving misinformation to the public, then certain journalists or individuals have a right to leak information. I pointed to the Pentagon Papers with Vietnam. The public has established some people will want the journalist thrown in jail, but generally there will never be enough public demand for the person's punishment if they're leaking information that conceals friendly fire, ineffective warfare, that they're lying about the effectiveness of the results of a war. The first two dumps, the one in Afghanistan and one in Iraq, provided this information about actually how poorly the Afghan war was going and how badly the Iraq war had gone. And the public had already established that. The thing is, we hadn't really been asked by WikiLeaks, and there hadn't been a consensus yet about diplomatic cables and the conversations and opinions of diplomats between countries and about the conducting of diplomacy. There had never been a consensus. Assange and WikiLeaks decided that they were going to push the open internet concept to its radical extreme and dump the tons of information. Most of it just salacious gossip. Most of it is just insults. What they found is a lot of embarrassing insults that American diplomats had said in cables, and they just dumped it into the public. This has turned out not the public, even though he still has a lot of supporters and a lot of people on the border, but a lot of people who were sitting on the fence or tended to support him have been pushed away, and he's kind of become a joke. Saturday Night Live is having a joke about him. People are publicly saying he should be killed or thrown in jail. This blew up in his face because he pushed this without the community or society of internet users having the time to make a decision. And he seemed to believe, oh, I have the tool, I can do it. But it doesn't work that way. The internet is still located in a social, historical framework. Okay, and it is still a social entity. It's our society there, and then the internet. It isn't the internet making our society. There's a feedback by the internet, but ultimately, our society, our culture, our democracies, our communities will decide what's acceptable and what's not. And this particular individual in this particular group made a decision that they had this particular information about cables. A lot of it was just embarrassing, stuff that embarrassed Prince Andrew, stuff that was embarrassing to the leaders of Germany, Italy, France. Some of it was interesting and relevant, but I would be frank, I've been reading through the WikiLeaks, and most of it's just been gossipy stuff about other countries. I mean, there may have been benefits in the fact that it exposed the extent to which Arab countries were going after Iran, and if they had limited to that, they very well may have been able to get away with it, but they didn't. They just dumped a whole load of stuff, and when it was dumped, nobody really knew whether the public of internet users would support this or not. And what's emerged is we don't want this. If anything has emerged, there's been a emerging consensus that most people on the web do not feel comfortable about the transmissions of their diplomats being intercepted and dumped publicly like this. The sad result, though, is that this is going to be used simply as a justification to carry out what's already been going on. The takeover of the internet by government agencies and government security agencies and large businesses. Okay, this has been going on. This is basically Web 2.0. Web 2.0 is Usenet being taken over by huge corporations and the government managing and supervising this. And now we have a much richer web, a more interactive web, but we have a much more controlled and regulated web. I mean, if you'd asked me 15 years ago, people would be going to jail for music downloads, I would have laughed at you. And we used to share stuff all the time if we could do it. We used to just send stuff. I remember 12 years ago, somebody would get a CD, we would think nothing. One guy got a CD, oh, burn copies of it and give it to everybody. We think nothing of it. Think nothing of taping music off the radio either. The extent of power and surveillance that the internet has enabled over our popular culture has increased. And all really that has come out of this dump is that the governments now feel more empowered to go after Julian Assange, who I frankly don't care about. I really don't care if he does time in jail. He seems like a total jackass. The WikiLeaks organization, another organization will rise up at something like this, but the outcome of this is going to be there's going to be a lot of new laws and a lot of new rules about also the distribution of information relating to government and financial information. And I think really that by dumping this gossipy, salacious, headline-grabbing information, particularly before he dumped the alleged Bank of America files, he has given Bank of America and the government regulators and the business government enterprise enough position to take those powers they will need to stop this. And that will mean a huge intervention in the internet by the industrial government organization to prevent what would probably be very valuable information for us to know what's going on in the banks, particularly the banks who got bailouts. But and this is the whole problem with the internet all along. The community of internet users have gotten this toy and they never have decided on the proper ethical, moral, democratic way to use it. They just go off and use it and play on it. And in the end, what happens is instead of a network of people forming on the internet, making democratic decisions and changing the system, you get fragmented people basically taking their ball and going and playing on their own. And one by one, the music downloaders, on one side are taken out by the music industry. Flickr comes in and puts tons and tons of filters on their Flickr site out of the blue. One day they just decide to do this. The government comes in with all kinds of restrictions about, taking down families' internet access. If one member of the family is caught downloading digital information that is copyrighted, and bit by bit, because of the lack of coordination, we've got the network, but it's completely distributed. And organizations that are very good at controlling distributed networks, states, large corporations, banks, global organizations, the UN, they know what to do with this. They know how to exert power. And that's what's happening. And unfortunately, Assange, I mean, I hope he'd be a buffoon, but he's probably going to end up being a villain because he's the one who pushed it to an extent where most people had reservations, and that gave the government agencies the pressure to go after this guy. I mean, it's essentially enough, particularly right-wing groups are now jumping after him, that the pressure on governments and the legitimacy for governments, not only to go after him in WikiLeaks, but then to go after the entire network of distributing information on the web that government agencies, nations, military establishments, or banks don't want distributed. We're going to see a lot of new laws passed in the next couple of years marking this. And that's the outcome. That's the legacy of WikiLeaks, is going to be probably a much more controlled internet.